I first heard about old green eyes from a man who refused to say the name out loud. We were sitting outside a gas station just off Route 23, with the mountains press in close enough that the road feels borrowed, not owned. It was late, after midnight, but the place was still lit up like a ship at sea, the only thing glowing for miles. The man was older, late 60s maybe, with hands stained by work and a stare that never quite landed on your face. He kept looking past me toward the dark slope rising behind the bumps. "You don't whistle out there," he said, nodding toward the trees. "Not at night." I laughed, the way people do when they think a rule is just a superstition. That's when he finally looked at me. His eyes weren't scared, they were resigned. "Because if you do," he said, slower now, "he knows you're human." I asked who he was. The man reached for his cup, took a long drink, then shook his head. "Doesn't matter what you call him. He's been here longer than names." That was the first time I heard about the eyes. Not the body, not a face. Just the eyes. Green, bright, fixed. Always watching from just inside the tree line, where the darkness thickens and sound dies too quickly. They say the eyes belong to a ghost, something left behind when the coal companies pulled out and the towns collapsed in on themselves. Others say it was never human at all, but everything agrees on one thing. Once you see them, they don't forget you. I didn't believe any of it. Not until 2 nights later, when my car broke down on a stretch of mountain road where the trees lean inward like they're listening. There was no cell service, no houses, no wind, just the road, the woods, and the quiet. I stepped out of the car to stretch my legs, and that's when I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being observed, not broadly, not vaguely, but with intent, like something had already decided who I was. I turned toward the trees. At first I saw nothing. Then 2 points of light ignited in the darkness, not glowing like reflections, not blinking, just there, green and steady. They were set too far apart to be an animal, too high to be standing on all fours, and then didn't move when I moved. They didn't retreat when I took a step closer. They watched. And somewhere deep in the woods, a branch snapped not from movement, but from weight. That was when I remembered the man at the gas station and the rule he'd given me. I did not whistle, but something else answered anyway. The snap of that branch didn't echo. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Sound usually carries in the mountains, rolls down slopes, bounces off rock, lingers longer than it should. But this was different. The noise was swallowed in almost immediately, as if the woods had closed their mouth around it. I stayed still. The green eyes didn't blink, didn't shift. They hovered at the edge of the tree line, just far enough back that the darkness around them stayed intact, like the rest of the shape refused to be seen. I told myself it was a trick of light, maybe reflectors, maybe an animal frozen in fear. Then the air changed. It grew heavier, damp and cold, the way it does just before a storm, but the sky above the road was clear, stars sharp and distant. No wind touched the leaves, no insects sang, and then I heard it. Not a growl, not a voice, a sound, low and drawn out, like breath being pulled through something too narrow. It came from the woods, from everywhere and nowhere at once, stretching between the trees instead of traveling through the air. It wasn't loud, but it pressed against my chest all the time, all the same. I felt it before I understood it. The sound wasn't meant for me. It was a signal. The eyes shifted slightly, just enough to confirm there was depth behind them, a body that hadn't stepped forward yet because it didn't need to. My instincts screamed at me to get back in the car. I didn't. Something about the way the eyes watched felt patient, evaluating, like it had already seen this moment play out before. Many times with many different people. I took a step backward. The sound stopped instantly. No fade, no echo, just gone. That's when the smell reached me. Wet earth, rotting leaves, and something underneath it. Sharp, old, metallic. The kind of smell that clings to abandoned places and doesn't fade even when the buildings are gone. I remembered something else the man had said, almost as an afterthought. "If you hear it breathe," he'd murmured, staring into his cup. "Don't answer back. Don't speak. Don't call for help. Because names matter out there. And sound is an invitation." The green eyes flared brighter, not with light, but focus. Like whatever owned them had leaned forward. I realized then that it wasn't blocking the road. It was waiting for me to choose a direction. Behind me, the dread car and empty asphalt. Ahead, miles of darkness and mountain curves. And to my left, the trees. The eyes shifted again, closer this time. Not by distance, by attention. I turned toward the car, slowly, carefully. I didn't want to break whatever fragile balance was holding the thing in the woods where it was. My hand reached the driver's door, fingers brushing cold metal, when I realized something that sent a jolt straight through my spine. There were footprints in the dust, not mine. They weren't deep, and they weren't fresh the way a person's would be. The gravel looked pressed, flattened as if something heavy had stood there for a long time without shifting its weight. Right beside my door, I hadn't heard it move. The green eyes were no longer at the tree line. They were closer now, still partly hidden, but unmistakably nearer. The darkness around them bending wrong, like the night itself was being dragged forward with them. I slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the breathing returned. This time it was closer, right outside the car. The windows fogged instantly, not from warmth, but from cold. White bloom spreading across the glass as if the night itself had leaned in to look at me. I twisted the key. Nothing. Again. The engine coughed, died, then went silent. The headlights flickered once, casting a brief, terrible image across the road. A shape stood in front of the car. It wasn't fully solid, too tall, too thin. Its outline wavered like smoke trying to remember how to be flesh. The eyes burned from deep inside its head, fixed directly on me now, no longer content to stay half hidden. And then it did something worse than moving. It tilted its head, not like an animal, like someone trying to recognize a face. A sound scraped across the hood, slow, deliberate. Nails or claws or something harder. I didn't look down. I couldn't. The breathing stopped again. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. Footsteps. Behind me. Inside the car. A soft shift of weight on the back seat. Close enough that the leather creaked. I stayed frozen, staring forward, knowing with absolute certainty that if I turned around, I would see eyes where no eyes should be. And that, this time, they would be green. I did not turn around. Every part of me wanted to, every instinct screaming that seeing was better than not knowing. But something deeper held me in place. The same instinct that keeps animals from looking directly at predators when they're already too close. The weight shifted again. The back seat dipped slightly, like someone adjusting how they sat. The leather let out a quiet creak, slow and deliberate, not the careless movement of an accident. Breath touched the back of my neck, cold, close. It smelled like the woods after rain and rot, laid with something sharper underneath, iron, old and familiar in a way that made my stomach knot. The green eyes were still there. I could see them reflected faintly in the windshield now, hovering where a rearview mirror should have shown me my own face. They weren't positioned like eyes in a head. They were too high, too far apart. Whatever stood in front of the car and whatever sat behind me were not separate. They were parts of the same thing. The realization settled slowly, heavily. This wasn't an encounter. It was a surround. The sound came again, not a voice, not words, but it shaped itself closer to speech this time. A vibration that crawled along the inside of my skull, as if something were testing the edges of language without committing to it. My name brushed against my thoughts, not spoken, recognized. The dashboard lights flickered, once, twice. The engine turned over with a sudden violence that made me gasp. The headlights flared bright, washing the road in harsh white, and the shape in front of the car vanished. The pressure behind me lifted. The back seat returned to its normal shape. I didn't question it. I slammed the accelerator down and the car lurched forward, tires screaming against gravel as I tore down the road, refusing to look in any direction except straight ahead. In the rear view mirror, the trees rushed past in a blur of shadow and light, and for just a moment, no longer than a blink, I saw them again. Two green eyes, not chasing, not fading, keeping pace, as if the road itself had agreed to carry them with me. I didn't slow down until I saw the lights. A handful at first, porch bulbs, a flickering street lamp, then more, spreading out into a small Appalachian town folded between hills like it had been placed there on purpose. The road straightened, the trees pulled back, and the sense of pressure in the air thinned just enough for me to breathe again. I crossed into town limits without noticing the sign. The car ran smoothly now, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. I pulled into the only place still open, a 24-hour diner with fogged windows and a neon sign that buzzed faintly like an insect trapped in glass. The parking lot was half full, too full for the hour. I shut the engine off and waited. Nothing followed. No wait, no breath, no eyes in the mirrors. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee that had been burning too long and fried food soaked into the walls. A few people sat in booths, quiet, shoulders hunched, conversations kept low and unfinished. I took a stool at the counter. The waitress poured coffee without asking. "You came in from the mountain," she said, not looking at me. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Her hand paused for half a second, just long enough for me to notice. Then she slid the cup toward me and moved on as if she'd said nothing unusual. I took a sip. It tasted flat, old. A man, 2 stools down, leaned closer, eyes fixed on the surface of his own cup. "Did you see the eyes?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. He nodded anyway. "Most folks do," he continued. "Some see him in the woods, some see him in the road, some see him where they shouldn't be at all." I asked him what it was. He shook his head. "Depends on who you ask. Depends on what it wants with you." "What does it want?" I said. This time, he looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. To be remembered, he said, and to make sure you remember it. I left the diner before dawn. The town didn't try to keep me. It didn't warn me. It didn't need to. As I pulled back onto the road, I checked the rearview mirror one last time. Nothing there. But when I glanced at the side window, I caught a reflection that wasn't mine. 2 green points of light. Gone the instant I turned my head. Daylight should have erased it. That's what I kept telling myself as the mountains thinned into rolling hills and the road widened into something familiar. Sunlight washed the trees in honest color. Gas stations appeared, billboards, signs that insisted on normal life continuing without pause. But the feeling stayed. No fear anymore. Awareness. Like the sense you get when someone stands too close behind you in a line, even when you don't hear them breathe. By the time I reached home, I was exhausted in a way sleep doesn't touch. My body ached, not from tension, but from being noticed for too long. I parked, shut the car off, and sat there longer than necessary, watching the quiet street through the windshield. Nothing moved. I went inside. The house greeted me with familiar sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of cooling pipes. I locked the door, then unlocked it, then locked it again, irritated with myself for needing the reassurance. I didn't see the eyes that day, not in mirrors, not in shadows, not in reflections. That night, I slept and dreamed. I was back on the road, standing exactly where my car had died. The forest loomed closer than it should have, trees bending inward, branches tangled like fingers. The green eyes floated ahead of me, steady and patient. This time, they weren't alone. More eyes opened in the darkness, dozens of them, some higher, some lower, all watching in silence. And somewhere behind me, something exhaled, slow and satisfied. I woke up gasping. My bedroom was dark, still, safe. I reached for the lamp. As the light filled the room, my gaze drifted to the window and stopped. Across the street, at the edge of my neighbor's yard, where the trees began, 2 green points hovered just inside the shade. Not bright, not glowing, just present. They didn't move when I stared. They didn't fade when the light stayed on. They watched, and in that moment, I understood the truth the townspeople never say out loud. Old green eyes doesn't haunt places. It follows people, not forever, just long enough to make sure you carry the road with you. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Some knowledge carries consequences the moment it's spoken out loud, and this felt like one of those things. The eyes across the street didn't feel hostile, but they didn't feel passive either. They felt like a reminder that I was still part of something unfinished. By morning, they were gone. No scorch marks in the grass, no crushed branches, no sign that anything had ever stood there. Just a normal suburban edge melting back into trees that suddenly looked too thin, too aware. I went to work. That was my first mistake. The building lights hummed overhead, too bright, too sterile. People talked around me, laughed, complained, lived their lives, but something had shifted in how sound reached me. Conversations flattened out, words losing their weight, as if part of my attention was tuned elsewhere now. That's when I noticed the rules. No one explained them. I just knew. Don't walk near tree lines at night. Don't answer when something calls from a distance. Don't look too long at reflections in glass after dark. And above all, Don't follow the eyes. I started seeing them in reflections that weren't meant to reflect anything. In dark computer monitors, in the shine of parked cars, in windows that showed the wrong angle of the street. Always green, always watching. Never closer than they needed to be. I tested it once. I slowed down near a park at dusk where the trees grew thick and the path disappeared into shadow. The air cooled instantly, the familiar pressure settling at the base of my skull. 2 green points emerged between the trunks. I stopped. They stopped. We stayed like that for a long time, measuring distance without moving an inch. Then I stepped back. The pressure lifted. The eyes faded. That was the second rule confirmed. It wasn't trying to lure me. It was checking my instincts, making sure I remembered how to stop. Because some people don't. Some people step forward, and the road never brings them back. I started paying attention to missing person notices after that. Not obsessively, just carefully. The way you look for a familiar face in a crowd without admitting you're doing it. Local papers, community boards, short articles that never made it past a few paragraphs. Hikers, hunters, drivers who pulled over and were never seen again. The details repeated. Last seen near a tree line. Vehicle found intact. No signs of struggle. Always at dusk. Always near old roads or places where the forest pressed close, as if trying to reclaim what had been cut away from it. I asked around, quietly. People who'd lived in the area longer than I had. People who knew how to pause before answering. Most changed the subject. One didn't. She was an older woman who ran a hardware store on the edge of the town. When I mentioned the green eyes, not directly, not by name, she stopped counting change and looked at me like I'd said something dangerous. "You saw him," she said. Not a question. I asked what happened to the ones who didn't come back. She set the money down carefully, like noise might matter. "They step forward," she said. "That's the mistake. They think it's an animal, or a man, or a ghost that wants something simple." "What does it want?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not want. Collect." She told me the old stories weren't about killing. Not really. They were about keeping. About people who crossed a line they didn't see and were folded into the woods the way fog folds into valleys. "Some folks hear it walking beside them," she continued. "Some feel it breathing behind their ear. But the ones who vanish," her eyes flicked toward the darkening window. "They followed the eyes." That night I dreamed again. This time I wasn't alone on the road. I watched myself from the trees, saw my own back, my own hesitant steps, the way I leaned forward when the green eyes brightened in response. In the dream, I didn't stop. I woke up before I could see what happened next. But the smell of wet earth lingered in my room long after morning came. It started quietly, so quietly that for a while I convinced myself nothing was happening at all. I'd be walking home after sunset and my steps would fall into a rhythm that didn't feel entirely mine. Not louder, not faster, just accompanied, as if the sound of my shoes on pavement had gained a second echo that arrived half a heartbeat late. I stopped one night to test it. The echo stopped too. I didn't turn around. I already knew better than that. The pressure returned after that, low, steady, riding just behind my right shoulder. Not touching, never touching. close enough that I felt the warmth of a presence without heat, like standing near something alive but not breathing the same air. I began to notice how the world adjusted around it. Streetlights flickered when I passed beneath them. Dogs went silent as I walked by fenced yards. My phone battery drained faster at night, dying without warning even when it showed half a charge. And always, at the edge of my vision, green, not bright, not glowing, waiting. One evening, the footsteps matched mine for 3 full blocks. I kept my pace even, my eyes forward, my breath slow. Every instinct screamed at me to acknowledge it, to look, to confirm. But I remembered the rule I'd learned too late and just in time. Don't follow, don't invite, don't recognize it openly. At the corner, I crossed the street. The pressure hesitated, then followed. That was the first time I felt fear sharpen into something clean and cold, not panic, understanding. It wasn't bound to the mountains anymore. It was walking with me because it could, because I had seen it, because the road had introduced us. When I reached my front steps, the presence stopped at the edge of my yard. I felt it remain there, patient, respectful of a boundary I hadn't drawn consciously but somehow still possessed. I unlocked the door with shaking hands. Inside, I leaned against the wall and listened. No footsteps, no breath, no sound at all. But when I dared to look out through the living room window, I saw them. 2 green points resting just beyond the porch light's reach, half lost in shadow. Not threatening, not pleading, just there, like a question waiting for the wrong answer. I stopped pretending it would go away. Once you accept that, things get simpler, not easier, but clearer. The presence didn't feel like a curse anymore. It felt like a condition, something triggered, something active, something that followed rules I hadn't agreed to but was expected to obey. I learned its distance. It never crossed thresholds. It never entered bright light. It never appeared when more than one person was nearby. But it always closed, waiting. One night, I did something I hadn't done since the road. I spoke, not loudly, not toward the trees, just into the air. I see you, I said. The pressure intensified instantly. The night tightened, sound pulling inward as if the world itself had leaned closer to hear. The eyes appeared at once, brighter than I'd ever seen them, hovering just beyond the reach of my porch light. They didn't move closer. They didn't retreat. They focused. I felt something then, not words, not images, but intent, sliding into place like a lock accepting the right key. The choice wasn't about fear or courage. It was about direction. Stay where I was. Live with the watching, the footsteps, the presence that never quite touched or follow. Not dragged, not chased, invited. The woods across the street darkened, deepening in a way that had nothing to do with the setting sun. The smell of wet earth returned, stronger now, layered with something ancient and patient. I stepped back. The pressure eased. The eyes dimmed slightly. That was the answer I'd expected. I went inside and closed the door. Behind the glass, the green eyes remained for a long time, unblinking, memorizing. I knew then what it would never do. It won't take me by force. It would wait for the night I decided to stop resisting. After that night, things changed in ways I couldn't point to directly. The eyes stopped appearing every evening. The footsteps didn't always follow. Some nights passed without any sign at all, and those were the hardest. Silence makes room for imagination, and imagination is dangerous when you know something real is patient. People started reacting to me differently. Not fear, not recognition, avoidance. Strangers on the sidewalk crossed the street without realizing why. Conversations ended a little too early. Dogs pulled on their lashes when I passed, whinnying low in their throats. Once, in a crowded grocery store, a child looked up at me and began to cry hard, panicked, the kind of crying that doesn't wait for a reason. The mother apologized. I didn't know what to say. In mirrors, my reflection was still mine, but sometimes it lagged, just a fraction of a second slower than my movements, like it needed confirmation before copying me. I checked my eyes obsessively, still brown, still human. But at night, when the lights were low and the house settled, I felt something just behind my gaze, like a presence peering out through me instead of at me. I realized then what the townspeople meant by collect. It wasn't about taking bodies. It was about leaving something behind. A trace, a scent, a signal. Old green eyes just didn't follow people. It marked them. Marked them so the woods would always know where they were. Marked them so roads would remember their footsteps. Marked them so if they ever chose to return, to step forward instead of back, the way would already be open. One night I dreamed I stood at the edge of the forest again. This time the eyes were close enough that I could see what surrounded them. Not a face, not a skull, but a suggestion of form, stitched together from shadow and memory. In the dream I didn't feel afraid. I felt recognized. When I woke, there were muddy footprints on my porch. They stopped at the door. They did not come inside. I still live here. That surprises people when they hear the story. The few I've trusted enough to tell it to. They expect an ending that involves distance, moving away, cutting ties, pretending geography can solve what attention started. But the road doesn't forget. Neither does what lives beside it. The eyes appear less now. Sometimes weeks pass without a sign, sometimes months, but every so often, at dusk, when the light thins and the world holds its breath, I feel it again. That familiar pressure, that awareness settling just behind me. Not threatening, not urgent, waiting. I don't walk near the trees at night anymore. I don't linger at the edge of dark roads. I don't answer sounds that don't belong to anything I can see. I follow the rules I learned too late and just in time. And so far, that's been enough, but I know how this ends. Not with teeth or claws or violence, with the moment. A night when I'm tired. A night when the silence feels heavier than fear. A night when the eyes appear closer than they have ever before, and I don't step back. Some people vanish, others remain. The difference isn't luck, it's which direction they choose when the road offers them the dark. And somewhere, just beyond the tree line, old green eyes is still watching, patient as ever, certain that one day I'll remember the way forward.